So last time we met, we covered 15 common types of insurance fraud. And most doctors aren't aware of it, but they're committing fraud. And I'll just share with you right here. These are the 5 common ones that I typically see that the doctors are committing fraud and they don't even know it. Number 1 is the SOAP notes not having 2 evaluation and management codes per visit. That's fraud. Now they'll ask for their money back. How big the fraud becomes determines whether it goes from civil to criminal. So as it gets bigger, or if there's a pattern, see, they look for patterns. Paying the patient for transportation, not the service. I've seen that before. Unnecessary treatment, not documented or supported by periodic testing and quantifying. That happens all the time. Chiropractors routinely do not document the need for care with re-exams and and quantifying, doing high sensitivity tests and quantifying. They just, do, even if they do re-exams, it's real generic stuff that is low sensitivity, and they just keep treating, until they put the kibosh on them, and that's the worst kind of chiropractor you could be. Paying a marketer for referrals. I had a client do that. I said, "What are you doing?" Fee structure fraud. That's common. Treat your personal injury patients one way versus these are just common ones. But let me go back to the 15. And the goal here is to go into what to do to combat it. What can you do to not be accused or not be guilty of fraud, of any of these 15 types of fraud? Okay. First, you got to know what they are. And so let me share with you how I know this is because I was falsely accused of fraud. And so I'm the only chiropractor in the United States that has beaten the United States government on fraud charges. In other words, I went to trial and beat them. So I know quite a bit about fraud and how they work and how deceptive they are. So anyway, and I will say this, and I didn't believe this until it actually happened, but I remember I hired a compliance officer. When I was raised, I was taught that, you just do the right thing. And so when I was falsely accused, I'm like, I didn't even know what they were talking about. When they said, I'm like, what are they talking about? What did they say that I'm doing? I didn't even know what they said I was doing. And I said, well, I'll talk to them. I'll be glad to talk to them and go over whatever they want to go over. I was so naive. I was born in a Midwestern town of population 3,000. I'm just friendly. I'm like, well, I'll be glad to talk. Well, they wouldn't even talk to me. And, they're out. Here's the bottom line that you need to know is they get raises. If you don't know this, the FBI and DOJ and those people that will fine you for fraud and crime and charge you with crimes, they get raises. Just like you keep statistics on dollar per visit, patient visits, patient retention, things like that, they keep their stats, and they get their stats on number of cases, number of convictions, and the amount of conviction. So it's a total scam. It's a negative feedback loop for us. It's a positive feedback loop for them. In other words, the more that they can get people convicted and the more jail time they can get, it looks better on their resume and they get raises. That's what I learned. And so they don't have any intentions on being, doing the right thing. I said, after I learned the process and dealing with them, I don't call them the U.S. Department of Justice anymore. They're called the U.S. Department of Conviction. They get bonuses and raises by nailing your ass. And you better get to be aware of it fast. And I was real naive to that. I remember when I hired a compliance officer and they told me that. I'm like, well, I thought she was a little nuts. I'm like, you sound like you're a little bit radical and nuts. No, she wasn't radical or nuts at all. They want to get you because when they get you, they get a nice bonus and raise with those statistics. And that means not only skirting the line, but going over the line. And I have plenty of areas where they went over that line to injustice. And that's a total different story on itself. But anyway, all this I was able to prove in court And that's why I won. And they have a 97% conviction rate. So having said that, we know something about fraud. So let's go through some of these, and we want to go into how not to put yourself in a position, even accidentally. You know, many a times the doctors don't even know they're doing fraud. Okay, so let's go into these categories and go, okay, how do we handle each of these categories and stop any fraud allegations? Number one, bill for services you did not perform. Okay, well, that's just on you. You bill for services you didn't perform. That's fraud. You deserve what you get. Okay, so some of these are just blatant and obvious. When you're billing for services you did not perform, and by the way, there's incidental. Like I had patients who, on real rare occasions, like they were rerouted to therapy before they got to me because they always went to the adjuster first and then the therapy. And on a seldom occasion, they went to therapy, and they were just checked. They were getting their therapies. It was those services were checked for the day, and the chiropractic adjustment was checked for the day. Well, they didn't get the chiropractic adjustment. It was by accident that they left because the therapist thought they already got their adjustment before they came to therapy because that was routine. Well, fortunately, I caught that, and of course, we scratched the services off that were the adjustment that wasn't done. We immediately scratched that off. But obviously, this is for fraudulent doctors. There's a doctor I know used to teach at Logan. Matter of fact, I think he doesn't now, but Logan Chiropractic College, and that's what he did. He routinely billed for extra X-rays he did not even take. Okay, so bottom line there is if it's an accident or incidental, it's not going to be a big deal, and you just need to correct it anyway. But when it's a pattern, bill for services, there's nothing that can be done about it. You're going to get convicted. You're just going to have to negotiate. You're going to have to hire an attorney, and you're going to have to negotiate your way out of that, and you're going to have to pay some money. That's what that's going to be. Bill for patients you did not see. That happens. Again, that's just counterintentions. Now, on occasion, again, you may bill for a patient you didn't see, but it's not going to show up as a pattern. See, that's one of the main keys to fraud is a pattern. It's not incidental because they know that. Because if they go to court and they go to a jury and it's shown as incidental, they know the jury's going to see it as incidental. So they know that. So it's patterns. You want to pay attention to patterns, okay? But billing patients for you did not see, that's a pattern. That's just on you. You deserve to pay a fine. You deserve criminal charges. It's just on you. Those are obvious. Treatment frequency fraud. That's a big one. I do see that. I see that way more. I'm sorry to say that, but I see that a lot. What is that? Treatment frequency fraud. And they tried to allege this with me until I pulled out the statistics from the patient's charts and just beat them with it. They didn't even have the real data, and they made those allegations against me. And then I went and got the real data to beat them down. And you're talking about the DOJ. They didn't even have real data, and they made those false claims. So this is they are not your friends. You got to play defense here. And not only defense, you got to go on the offense and make sure this stuff doesn't happen. So what is treatment frequency fraud? Well, it's real easy. It's real easiest to show treatment frequency fraud. We just pull up your records, and then we'll just look at the patients that are personal injury patients with insurance, and we'll look at the treatment frequency for them versus your cash patients or your major medical patients. That's just real easy. So what I always say, and like one doctor, I was talking with him, and he meet all the personal injury patients after the reported findings. He would put them on 3 times a week. All the other cash patients and major medical, twice a week. That's fraud. It's ethically and morally wrong, and it's fraud. I couldn't believe I was like, I can't even believe you told me that. And it's so easy. A lot of doctors think this stuff is hidden. This stuff is so easy to find. They subpoena your records, especially if it's electronic. They already have the information. They don't even have to ask you for anything. They just got it. So treatment frequency fraud. So how would we stop treatment frequency fraud? Well, here's what I did is everybody got the similar frequency of treatments, period. Okay. Now it's based, obviously, everybody's treatment frequency is based on their individual status and biomarkers, et cetera. But when they see treatment frequency of PI patients, daily 3 times a week, da 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 da, and then all the other ones, major medical cash, don't even compare to that. You got a problem. You're going to have a fraud problem. So treatment frequency. So do everything you can to equalize your treatment frequency. And it'll vary. Sometimes you have cash. Like I always say, don't try to get rich on one patient. I say that all the time. So there's personal injury cases that come in that are not $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, $7,000 cases. Sometimes little kids come in, they don't have much of an injury, they heal quickly, there's no permanent injury. That only might be $1,000, $1,500 case. I'm not trying to make every case a $5,000 case. And that's where you'll get caught when you're trying to do that. So treatment frequency fraud, that's what that is. So you'll see that PI case, daily, 3 times, twice a week. Not only that, but you'll extend it out. Well, you better look at your records and go, wait a minute. Do I have similar problems and complaints with my other patients? And are they getting 3 times a week, twice a week? Well, the same type of treatment frequency. And now, again, that's on you. But you and I know both as well that this is very common. If it's a personal injury patient, everything goes to the hilt. And then that's when you're in trouble. So equalize it out. That doesn't mean everybody's always going to get the same thing. But when you look at your statistics, should we see the majority of personal injury cases matching major medical or cash patients with the same diagnosis and injuries? Yes, we should. That's what you should see. So you got to watch that. You got to be careful about that. And one of the reasons it also happens is the doctor doesn't want to charge the cash patient, for the amount of visits that they would need. And so you see the doctor giving really reduced visits to the cash patient or the major medical patient versus the personal injury patient. So they may give the personal injury patient, the true care that they would need. That's kind of usually what happens, so to speak, frequency wise. And then they have a reduced fee for or reduced visits for the other patient. Now I'm going to go into how to handle that. And one of the things we're going to go into is the difference with using, because remember, you can't do fee splitting in healthcare. You can't charge one type of people one fee, and then in other words, you can't charge for the same insurance code one fee for a personal injury patient and then a separate fee for a cash patient. You can't do that. That's fee splitting. That's illegal. So how can you treat the patients the same? And that stops a lot of fraud. And we're going to go into that in detail. And that's called how to use hardship agreements versus time of service agreements. And that's what you really need to be aware of, is how to use those, because that'll prevent a lot of fraud. And I'm going to go into that in just a second. But I'm going to give the same treatment. I'm going to give the same schedule. Now, that person, I'm going to give them a financial discount more, and I'll go into the details of how it works. But that's how I'm going to give the treatment frequency and the treatment amount the same. I'm going to give that cash patient the same recommendations as that personal injury patient. I'm going to give the major, okay? And so it could be a $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 bill, but it's not going to be for the patient, because I'm going to use the hardship agreement or the time of service discount, and those are totally legal, and that's what they're for. What you're not supposed to do is change the frequency or the treatment based on the reimbursement. That's fraud. Okay, so I'll go into that in just a second. Fee structure fraud, I talked about that. And that's talking about the same service, whether it's the same therapy, same service, two different fees. So that's different. And there's a difference between, if you're going to do a therapy with like an active therapy with the full unit of time. And then if you don't, then you better put in a modifier with it because it's going to look like fee splitting. So if if you're going to do a modifier, put in the fee splitting, or put in the modifier if you're not going to do the same. And again, it looks bad when you have all the modifiers for cash patients and you have no modifiers for insurance patients. See, that's fraud. So you do best to stick with the treatment and the therapies as the same as much as possible, and then use the hardship agreement and the cash discount to make it affordable for the cash patient or the major medical insurance patient. That's when it's legal. That's how you make it legal. But you start changing frequency and therapies, and it's obvious with the different categories of cash and personal injury, that's fraud. And that happens all the time. I see that in all offices. PI patient, they're seeing 3 weeks forever. They get the 2 or 3 therapies. They get full therapies. And then you look at their cash visit, and they get decreased frequency and decreased therapy. That's fraud. Okay, and that's real common. I see that a lot. Okay, so fee structure fraud, can't charge different prices for the same therapies, etc. Okay, short the time required for coded service. Okay. And a lot of these things you'll think you'll get away with. I'll tell you what, when they subpoena your records and they do a statistical analysis, it'll be a whole different story. Short the time required for coded service. Now again, I usually found that that's not an accident. If you're shorting the time, what's required, like say you're doing active therapy, and there's a required amount of time with that patient for that code, and you don't do it. Well, who's going to know about it? Well, remember the people that are most likely, who are the people most likely to turn you in, and how does this typically remember? It's typically a disgruntled employee that knows about it. That's who's going to turn you in. And then the other one is by accident. They'll request your records and they'll see something on there by accident. They may request 2 or 3 records. And then now they're looking for a trend. Now once they see it, they'll go, wait a minute. Then they'll supply no more of them. And now they're looking for a trend, and now you're in trouble. So fee structure or shorten the time required for coded visits. Sometimes that's just by accident. Typically, with attended services, there's no time code required for those. Typically, you're talking about the rehabilitation code, that there's required time codes, etc. But when you're doing that, again, this is really an interesting topic because there's so many angles to it. So if you don't know, there's a certain amount of time, but again, is it a trend line? What don't know is not an accepted answer in court. Once you have your license and your billing, you're required to know, period. That's not a defense. I didn't know. So anyway, sometimes doctors will lower that code and then bill for the full code. Well, that'll get caught. You'll get caught for that. Now, if you know that, that's just on you, and you deserve to get caught. You deserve whatever it is they give you. Short time code. What is another example? That's really the main one is not doing the full service that's needed for. And what some doctors do is they'll just time it. They'll put a timer on it. Time in and time out is what they'll do. They'll either have the patient or the staff, the therapist, put in, time out. Okay. But remember, when we look at time services, if it's required, 15 minutes, something like that, then they don't have to be on that therapy from 1 second to the 15 minutes. It's a compilation. It's the evaluation, diagnosis, and therapy and note writing. So you got 4 things you have to do within that time frame. It's not them just being on the therapy that whole time frame. Okay, so just keep that in mind. All right, so fee structure, a short time recurrent. Okay, so that bill for higher coded service than you delivered. That happens every now and then. Some of the most common ones I've seen is the examination code, though I do see that a lot. A doctor will do a lower service of evaluation and management, and they'll bill for a higher service. I see that a lot, especially with personal injury. So they'll do their regular code that they bill for major medical, and then they'll do the same services, but bill for the next step up so they can get paid more for that exam. That's fraud. So when you do step up, you are required to do the extra services for that patient. And typically there's only two exam codes that most chiropractors will use. For the average patient, it's one particular code, and then if it's an extensive patient, cash or major medical, which is kind of rare, or the personal injury patient, which is typically more extensive, that's when you would use that. Bill for higher, so that's bill for higher code service than you delivered. Again, that's a pattern. You look for a pattern. They'll find that with your records when they subpoena them. What it does, it's a domino effect is what happens. That's how you get caught. It's typically a domino effect. Payment type preference fraud. I was accused of that too. And they charged me with it without even having the statistics or the reality. And when they said that, I couldn't believe it. I just went down to the files and I pulled out a sample file and I did the statistics and showed them how they were wrong. We're talking about the United States Department of Justice making false allegations. They didn't even have the data and they made the false fraud claim. It blew my mind. I'm like, I can't believe. Well, now I know why. The name of the game is to get you. That's how they get their raises and go into bigger houses. So bill for higher code, let's see, payment type. Now, payment type. So what is that? That's when you're giving all the personal injury patients payment type because it's personal injury. You're giving them a special more treatment, more therapy. Not just higher visits, but more therapy. That's what that is. So again, if we look at your records and we see the personal injury patients, and then we go, okay, well, what therapies did you do? And there's 2 therapies and 3 therapies, and there's maybe 2 passive therapies, 2 a modifier and a attended therapy, and then you go to all the cash patients, and there's like no therapies or 1 therapy. That's fraud. You're in trouble, and it's easy to find. That's payment type fraud. In other words, and again, it just kind of shows itself. Does it have to be exactly correct? No. But should it all pretty much fall in a line, whether it was a cash patient or a PI, should it all, should you have the same amount of PI patients that get released early because they're young and they don't have as many problems as cash patients? Yes. Should you have some cash patients that are chronic and more severe, difficult problems that require more frequency, therapy, et cetera? Yes. So you better have that mixture in there. It better not be real clear black and white, or that's fraud. Again, it's a pattern. So billing for the higher payment type fraud, attorney kickback. I personally haven't, I have not dealt with any attorneys or dealt with this at all, but I do have clients that got involved with some shaky deals where the attorney wanted a kickback, and the kickback is in many ways. It's gifts, it's vacations, so it might not be directly. And obviously I'm not talking about just writing the attorney a check. You send me a case, I give you $500. That's not what I'm talking about. It might be cash under the table, or, and a lot of times that's, an easy way to do it without there being a record. Of course, there's going to be a record if there's gifts because you have to buy the gifts. But you know, in any profession, there's always a black mark. There's always shysters in every profession. So are there going to be attorney kickbacks? Yeah, there's going to be. And are there going to be some ways to try to avoid it? Yeah. There was a big attorney kickback here in South Florida scheme with a company that was trying to, it was actually a group company, and they were trying to skirt the law by going through different LLCs and corporations where the attorneys were actually part owners of the medical facilities that they were getting paid. So they were referring their clients to the medical facilities that they were indirectly, but they had to chase down all the different names. You know, they had one LLC and then another and then another and a shell. And so you had to go through, well, they did. They went through all of them and charged them. That's what they did. So that's just bad news. I mean, that's just real bad news, attorney kickbacks. The value, remember the value you should be giving. And I've never had an attorney ask me for a kickback. The value is what you do. Usually the kickbacks are for the doctors who don't know how to create value. That's usually what it is. Doctors who don't know documentation, high sensitivity, high relevancy, don't know how to do narrative reports, trial testimony, all that. That's typically who does that. I had one client. I mean, I've had a few clients that started making money and they got carried away. And one guy, he was doing that with referrals, and he lost his license in that state. And he had criminal charges filed against him. So, and then, you know, the other thing is, let's say even you do give cash, right, where you really can't trace it. What happens when that attorney wants to turn on you? What happens then? I mean, everything's going to go bad real fast with that. That's just a total bad deal. Even if you're trying to hide the kickbacks, but that is a real bad deal. Fortunately, you don't even have to get in that game. You know, it's such a small percentage of personal injury. All you got to do is be good. That's all you got to do. You just be good. Be able to do the sales presentation to show them you're good, and then be good. That's all you got to do, because there's too many good, normal attorneys that don't want to fool with that. They don't want to put their license on the line with that kind of stuff. That's who I deal with. I've never dealt with any of that stuff. Okay, paying for referrals, changing records after the fact, that's a real no-no. And now you can, with a forensic scientist, not forensic, like with a forensic accountant, that is easily found. Now you can, I mean, you can go in there and find when they changed the records. I mean, look at Elon Musk. He just went back in there and found all this stuff from Twitter and all the junk they were doing. And here it is. It's all there. Once it's in digital form, it's there. I don't know if you know it, but even when you erase it, it's still there. I mean, when they use these scrubbers, all they're doing is just erasing it more and more times. Well, it just needs to be more sophisticated software to peel it like an onion. That's what they did with Hillary Clinton's emails too. She used bleach bit. So what did they do? Well, all that did is it just went through many rounds of erasing the digital. Well, they just have more sophisticated software that uncovered all those rounds that her bleach bit covered. And so that's how they caught her with a crime, and then they decided not to charge her with it. So, okay, so that is changing records after the fact. So it doesn't matter if it's digital. And the same thing if it's PIN. Now, what you can do is if you go in and change a record, and what a lot of doctors do is they'll do notes after the fact, and they'll put they'll put the original date in, and then they'll come in on a Saturday or 2 weeks later, you know, and do the notes. You can't do that. Digital, it's going to be easy to see what you did. And if you have paper, what you want to do to make it legal is write the date down when you changed it. In other words, acknowledge you changed it and write the date down, and then just say and then your reason for changing it. That's it. But that's how you stop that fraud. So acknowledge a different time that you added it versus what you did or changed it. Because what happens, I'll give you a story with that too. A doctor did not have all his documentation support, mainly the 2 evaluation management codes for all the visits. Well, the insurance company asked for all that money back. So and it was over $100,000. So, and they'll get it. Now that's civil. So they'll just keep from paying you until they get their money back through services. But when it gets that big, they turn it over to the DOJ and now it becomes criminal when they see it's a pattern. So anyway, that's what happened with him. And then he tried to go back in there and change the information. And that was real bad. That was not a good scene. So, and he had all of these to go back. So, he's just showing fraud. He's just going back, committing fraud, going back, because this was over a few years. The $100,000 was with one insurance company over a few years. So here he is trying to go back to all the notes and write in. And he was foolish enough to even try to write in the original date. This was before computers. And he was even foolish enough to try to go back 1 year and 2 years and write in the date of that. And the best that he could have done is went back in and wrote the notes and added it based on memory, put the correct date, and then put on there based on my memory. That would have been the legal way of doing it. Not that he still wouldn't have had to pay, because that would have just been a civil suit. But anyway, having said that, paying for referrals, changing records, we talked about that. Not document the SOAP notes each visit. Remember, the SOAP note is what establishes the need for care. It's federal guidelines of Medicare, Medicaid, and everybody uses federal guidelines. So make sure you're, and I'll do a separate webinar on the basics of SOAP notes. But we talked about the 2 main problems is if you don't do them at all, number 1, that's a big problem. But that's not typically the problem I see. It's that you didn't do the evaluation management codes. And usually that's from ignorance. It's that's just from ignorance. The doctor didn't even know it. But remember, you're still guilty. Not documenting 2 evaluation and management codes, that's what that is with the SOAP note. So that, again, that's just doing it. Paying them personally for their transportation. We talked about that. Now you just put it on Uber. Just create a business Uber account and then put it on there. And then that's legitimate billing for the patient and their transportation to get to your office. And then you can add a reasonable administrative fee to that and bill it. So, and that's all fine. But you can't give the patient the money. That's seen as a kickback for coming in for the visits. Billing for a non-documented complaint. Seen that before, but obviously, that's on you if you're billing for something that wasn't documented. And I'll tell you a lot of times what that is, and I see this when I evaluate doctors' offices. They did the services and they just forgot to document them. They just didn't document them. So, but guess what? It's still fraud if it's a pattern. And the doctor didn't have any counter intentions. He just, I see that a lot with exams. The exams aren't even fully filled out. They're billing for the regular fee exam. Same with regular visits. They'll mark the visits down in the services and there's no documentation establishing the need for care. See that a lot. So billing for non-documented complaint, that's a different story. I mean, you're going out of your way. And again, when you do things that are obvious and gross, you deserve what you get. One of the things also is billing for a different area. So let's go into how to solve some of these. Some of these are just you're just guilty. You're doing it and you're guilty, and that's that. Okay. Most of these aren't. Most of these I found to be treatment frequency fraud, therapy fraud. Those are the most types of frauds that I've seen. And then even billing for different services, but usually a higher end service like therapy or an exam. without the sufficient services delivered. And I typically have found that most of the time that's ignorance also. The doctor just didn't know any better. So let's go into, and then one of the big reasons for fraud is what I talked about is the doctor doesn't want to charge the patient the same amount. He doesn't want to charge the cash patient or the major medical patient $3, $4, $5, $6,000 that he's going to get for a PI patient. He just doesn't want to do it. Doesn't have the conviction, doesn't have the ability, all that kind of stuff. And so here you go. Now you got problems. You got problems. So you have treatment frequency fraud, therapy fraud, and it's too easy to find out. So how can you do that? How can you deliver it and still make it affordable? Well, here's how. Deliver, and see, also, I didn't have two different systems. A lot of doctors, and when you get subpoenaed, they'll find this out. A lot of doctors have one system of documentation for personal injury cases. In other words, they'll pay more attention because they know it's going to be looked at or it could go to court or whatever. And then they have a crappy, totally different system for major medical and cash. They don't even really pay attention. They may just put the date down and that's it. Okay? That's fraud. So you got to be careful about that. Now, let's go into how to handle that. So how can you, well, here's what you do to not do therapy fraud, frequency fraud. Oh, okay. So here's how you do that. You want to do the services that you would do, whether it was a cash patient, Medicare patient, major medical, personal injury patient. Now, of course, with the personal injury patient, you'll get paid for that and all that. Okay, let's go back to how you can do it without blowing the patient out of the water financially and all that stuff. So what you do, because remember, clinically, you're supposed to deliver the same services for similar conditions. That's what you're supposed to do clinically. And you can't do fee splitting. So how can you make it? So how can you do that? See, it's a legitimate question, because do you really want to charge a cash patient $5,000? Most people don't, but they won't have any trouble charging a personal injury case $5,000. And I'm talking about the same injury, similar injuries, all that kind of stuff. So what you do, number one is, and don't have different documentation systems. That's number one. Like my patient education system was based on the science of the 3 phases of healing. It didn't matter if you were a Medicare patient, a cash patient, or a PI patient. It didn't matter. That's what it was based on. There was no difference. The documentation was the same. So whatever I wrote down. Now, what wasn't, I didn't do functional capacity indexes, that kind of stuff that you need extra for the PI patient. So that was probably the only thing I didn't do. But as far as therapies and frequency of visit, you look at my records, you're going to see the cash visit, you're going to see the same frequency of visits. You're going to see the therapies, the same therapies as the PI. But how was I able to do that and make it affordable? Well, this is how. So do the same frequency, do the same system, do the same therapies, and then what you do is you give the patient the discount. Now, that's not fee splitting. And how you make it legal is you either use what's called a hardship agreement or a time of service agreement. And let me go into the basics of those two and which one you should use and why. The time of service agreement is designed to give the patient a discount if you don't have all the other associated costs with billing, administrative cost, stamps, envelopes, pencils, pens, everything related to billing, okay? Labor. Okay, so that's called a time of service, and that's when the patient actually pays at the time of service because you don't have these extra administrative costs. Now, here's the pros and cons about that is it still has to be within a legitimate percentage of your administrative cost. So let's say we look at your overhead, and this is what happens when you go to court. When you get charged, this is the detail stuff that comes out, the nasty stuff that you don't want out if you're doing it wrong. So what happens is the administrative fee that you saved is only supposed to be the amount of discount you're given. So if your administrative fee was 15% of your overhead, then you're only supposed to give around a 15%. If you gave 17%, something like that's not going to be a big deal, right? You always got to think of it as, how's the jury going to see it? That's always the end answer, because that's ultimately what they have to prove. But if your administrative costs are 15% and then you give a 85% discount, well, that's a problem. It's not supported, and that's not legal. So the time of service discount, I don't use, and I didn't use for those reasons. Not only the amount of discount that I could give, but also they had to pay at that time. Okay. So that's the reason, those are the guidelines with the time of service discount, the amount of discount, relative and proportional to your administrative fees. All right. Let's go to the hardship discount. That's the one that I suggest using. Well, what are the guidelines with hardship discount? Does the person have to ask for a discount? No. Do they have to show their check stubs? No. Do they have to show their tax returns? No. What's the only guideline for you to give and offer a hardship discount? You believe the patient would not have been able to receive the services without it. Let me say that again. In other words, it's based on you. It could be based on the patient's reaction, their facial expression, their tone. In other words, the patient didn't have to say anything about, I need a discount, okay? Because we're in the business of helping people, not checking their W-2, their tax returns to see if they can afford care. So that's where you're going to have the most flexibility, number one. So you can apply it at will. In other words, if you think that it's too much for that person to afford, well, it's your opinion. And number one. Number two, you can give whatever discount you want. You're not limited by an administrative discount. You're not limited by a time of service. In other words, they got to pay at that time. You can do terms. And that's what we did. So we did clinically everything approximate to the personal injury patient relative to this, the same findings. Okay. That's what keeps it legal. And then what we did to make it affordable legally is we just offered them a hardship discount. Now you have to have it documented. So we just had a sheet of paper and we just put our recommendations down. We put the normal cost that it was, and whatever we agreed upon, whatever the fee was on the payments, the terms, we just put it in there. That was it. It didn't matter if it was a 50% discount, 70% discount. It didn't matter. And that's what I did with my patients too. We that's a whole nother, program, patient education and all that. But we would go over all the treatment. We'd have the patient pick the services they wanted after they were educated. We'd add up all the fees. The fees were the same. We didn't change therapies and frequency and all that. And then we gave them a discount for prepaying or agreeing to care. In other words, terms. And then we would have them sign the hardship discount. That's how it worked. And when we did the discount, and I'm not going to, I teach this with patient education, and it's a whole different story, but I'm just trying to share some basic light on this, how to make it all legal. And then when we gave the discount, we just put it in there, time of service discount. And then even if the patient couldn't afford that, we always had a system to make it affordable. We never turned the patient away from care, ever. I never turned a patient over to small claims court, ever. So that's how we make it affordable, is there's tiers. And the bottom line is we would get to the bottom tier after we went through 2 other tiers, and we would just go into, if they wanted to care, first of all, what could they afford, A, or they may wanted an abbreviated version of the care. Maybe they didn't want all 3 phases of the care. It was one of those two. But we got the agreement. And then we had them sign the hardship discount. And that's what makes it legal. Now, is there a percentage of hardship discounts? Some people say, well, that depends on the economics of your area, what percentage of poverty. No, everybody spends their money differently. You have people that you can have somebody who's in poverty that has more cash in their pocket than somebody who's making a six-figure income and a credit card debt over their head. And those are two totally different socioeconomic classes. So it has nothing to do with the socioeconomic class percentage within your area. Nothing to do with it. It has to do with the individual. So that's what we did. That's how we made it affordable. And by the way, that's the goal. The goal is for you to help people, not turn people away. And this is how you do it legally. Do the hardship, do the recommendations. Don't have a different system, number one. They find out you have a different patient education system of regular patients versus PI patients. That's fraud. They find out you have a different frequency system. That's fraud. They find out you have a different therapy system. That's fraud. These are the common frauds that are being done by chiropractors, and they don't even know it. And it's too easy to pull your records and find it out. And remember, is there a certain criteria? No. The criteria is whether they want to charge you or not. Now, first they'll go for the money. The insurance companies want the money back. The DOJ, they want to stack their crimes. Remember, they get bonuses and raises by the number of cases they can charge, the number of convictions, and the amount of jail time. That's how that works. And so it's totally their opinion. And their opinion is based on whether or not the time, effort, and energy is worth it versus the return, essentially is what it'll come down to. So you don't have to be the big player, the big dog, multiple offices. You don't have to be that at all. Matter of fact, if you have a big name in the community, but you don't have a big office and you're not generating, they could go after you just because you have a big name in the community and they want to create a ripple effect. They want that to go out. So anyway, that's how you legitimately, some of these are just blatantly fraud and you're doing them and that you just deserve what you get. Most of these are not. Most chiropractors that commit fraud don't even know they're committing fraud for the different reasons that I covered. But that's what you do. Don't have different services. Don't have a different documenting services. Don't have different therapies. Don't have different patient education. Don't have different frequencies of care. Base everything, and that's what it should be based on. It should be based on, the science of the three phases of healing and their biomarkers. Period. That's it. If it's not based on that, it's fraud. That's what it should be based on. Every patient. It doesn't matter if it's a cash or major medical or personal injury. Period. And then give the discount, give the hardship agreement discount. That makes it affordable. And then I just had tiers. I would start here. They couldn't do that. I would do this. And then the bottom line is I just go, well, what can you afford? If they wanted all three phases, what can you afford? Boom. I'm signing it's legal. I'm making it affordable. I'm not losing patients. Or maybe they didn't want all three phases of care. Or it could be a combination of both. They didn't want all three phases and they couldn't afford that. See, so I'm going to modify it, but they're going to get everything the same clinically. That's the key. Clinically, everything has to be not differentiated based on money. That's the difference with fraud right there. And so to make yourself a little bit more bulletproof is you can do all those services. You can, but if you're going to do very frequency therapy and all that, well, you're headed to trouble. You're headed to trouble. So do them all the same, cash, major medical, whatever. Base your education the same. Keep your documentation the same. Don't have a different documentation system. That's a clue right there. You're committing fraud. And then just give the discount and make the discount legal with the hardship agreement. That's it. That's how you can do everything legally. Do it right, man. You don't need to do it any other way. There's plenty of business out there. Any questions?
Oh, can you send out your hardship agreement?
Yes. It's real,
Oh,
it's just so you know, it's real simple. It just says hardship agreement, and then it just basically says, to something like the extent of for me to, the patient, for me to be able to afford care, I would need this discount. That's it. And then you just put in, whatever the fees were and whatever discount you gave. That's how easy a hardship agreement is.
okay. And then on your soap note, you said you had a structure on the wall that you would do a dictation and teach your other doctors.
Yeah, but I only put it on the wall until they memorized it. Well, how many times do you have to do a soap note before you memorized it? Well, we're seeing 50 to 70 patients a day. Typically in 3 days, we did 200. Well, after you do 30 in one day, I mean,
I'd like to see it just to compare it to what I'm doing.
yeah, I just put it on the wall. Same with the exam. I just put it on the wall just so that when the doctor was learning, he could just glance at it. But soap
Gotcha.
notes are easy once you learn them. The exam's a little different. I kept that on the wall just to remember. It's kind of like a checklist. Just like you should have your checklist for all your personal injury patients that I give you, and you should look at it. Make sure you're doing, the documentation you need to be doing. That's a checklist. It should go in every file. And then, so the same with that. But that's how the hardship agreement and soap notes. But soap notes were too easy. By the time you did it 30 times in one day, you know, I mean, how many times do you have to do something that's not that complex before it's in unconscious incompetence memory? Not a lot. 30 is like way, you can generally within 3 days, when the doctors did it in 3 days, by the end of the third day, they weren't even looking at it anymore. They already knew what to do. Now it was muscle, unconscious incompetence, muscle memory. That's how that worked. Any other questions? Great. I don't know if you, so we made all the announcements, all that. I don't know if you saw